just when you were talking about all the texts and the readings and the learnings that you had in your lifetime that really affected you, that got me into thinking, okay, I wonder what's really affected me. And so interesting for me, I can't really cite a typical spiritual text that has had a great influence on me. So I don't know what that really says about me, but it's not that I haven't read them. Let me tell you, I have read them. So I just think that's interesting. But two things I wanted to point out that I wrote down that had great impact on me was when I was in college, I started reading P.G. Wodehouse. Who has read P.G. Wodehouse? Great comic writer. He died in 1975. He wrote, I don't know, 100 books. I have them all. And they are just frothy plots. Now, when I think about, okay, why did P.G. Wodehouse have such an influence on me? One is he's a fantastic writer. And so I think just reading his books really helped my writing. Two, all of his plots are full of coincidence and random stuff that happens to the characters.
Yeah.
Almost nothing ever turns out as planned.
Everyone's at the mercy of.
Everyone is at the mercy of the environment that they're in. And even though things don't, there's always all sorts of plotting going on in these books, but and they all end felicitously, but never as anybody planned. And that for me, I think, was a huge life lesson, which I haven't expressed that until this moment. Just writing down this list, I realized. And then the last thing I want to say, when I was about 11 years old, I read a book called Where Away, which is a nautical term, a sailing term. And I own a copy of that book. I spent a lot of time finding it. It's a children's book. And it's a book about a young girl, she's 10 or 11, who's been left, has her dad is a clipper ship captain, and she's been left behind in Maine because she needs to go to school. And her parents are kind of going around the world, and she's desperately unhappy about that. Stows away on a ship, and the rest of the book is her chasing her parents down, eventually catching up with them. She convinces her best friend in Maine to go with her as a stowaway. And amazingly, I think, for a children's book, a young adult book, the friend that she convinces to stow away with her dies as part of this attempt to catch up. It's amazing, right? In a young children's book.
This is like a spiritual story for children, in a way.
It's a what?
This is like a spiritual story for children.
It's like a spiritual story for children. And that, I mean, I love that book, and I read it over and over again. Now, unlike the P.G. Wodehouse, where I think I know what I learned from that. I can't articulate what I learned from reading that book, but it was thank you, Julia, it was a spiritual thing that I learned from that book, and it has always made a huge influence in my life.
Wow.
Though it's hard for me to pinpoint what that is. So I just wanted to share that because I can't point to a classic spiritual reading, but
you found your own.
Those two books meant, one author and then one book meant a lot to me.
And I think you hit something on it again, right? I'm going to say it again, hit something on the head. And right, like I didn't talk about this, but I'll briefly say it. So like there are 3 books that shaped me and probably shaped my interaction with everything else. And one I read way too young, and I didn't learn to read until way too
right.
Because my dyslexia. And I didn't really learn to devour books until I was in junior high, and I encountered Robert Heinlein. But Imagica by Clive Barker, I remember encountering this book, and anybody that knows Clive Barker knows that he makes humans the monsters, and that it's always this magical interaction between love in this quest for mitigating suffering. And Magica is this quest through the dream sea, or this space and this place. And it's if you've never read a Magica, Clive Barker created a modern masterpiece in that. Later, I read one of his other books, and I've read all of his books because he's my favorite author, but The Thief of Always is a children's book.
Ah, what a fantastic title.
And it deals with very similar themes of loss and longing, and who you are versus giving yourself away, and right, like losing your childhood and losing your innocence, which in some ways, right, is that self you talk to in the mirror. Yeah. The final book I'll say, and I read this right when I met my wife, is Haruki Murakami's The Wind-Up Bird Chronicles. And it's this book about a guy who winds up in a well. And I'm not going to give too much away because it's this really interesting Japanese meditation on loss and longing. But it really is like these stories that we tell ourselves and we tell each other's shape us. And I'm one to be a fan of hearing from others about works that shape them, and that we shouldn't be afraid of stories. We shouldn't be afraid of other ways of knowing. We shouldn't be afraid of ideas, because they help us know and grapple with reality in ways that we wouldn't otherwise experience, and they help enhance the richness of the tapestry that we are communally weaving. I had a friend who recently said, art, books, music, it's our opportunity to hold hands in a shared space and moment. And I was like, dude, that's amazing. I was like, I'm going to steal it.
Very good. Yes.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Across time and across space.